Hello, hello. Welcome to
Hey, Tom, how
another
you doing?
good. Welcome to another episode of the University of South Carolina's Darla Moore School of Business Mentorship Program. I'll be
Awesome.
your host today. My name is Tom Winterstein. I'm an MBA class of 1989. I'm a certified mental performance coach and a mentor for programs like this for over 2 decades. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of driven students as they prepare for the next stages of their professional lives. Today, I'm excited to spotlight someone who represents the next generation of business and communication talent, Hayden Henry. Hayden is an MBA candidate student at the University of South Carolina focused on marketing with a certificate in business analytics. He's built a strong academic foundation, contributed to analytics and research initiatives, and developed a growing passion for communication strategy. What I admire most is the range behind his experience, from sports science analytics to cross functional projects, very meaningful volunteer work, and even a proficiency in Spanish. All of that reflects a communicator who brings both analytical clarity and human awareness to the table. Today's conversation will give you a deeper look into how Hayden thinks, how he approaches challenges, and how he's preparing himself for a career in marketing communications at the enterprise level. Let's dive in. Hey, and to add a little twist, Hayden does not know the questions in advance. Welcome, Hayden. How are you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you very much for the kind words. I can't remember the last time, or if ever, I ever gotten a nice warm introduction like that. So that was a
Well,
joy to hear, and I'm looking forward to hearing the questions you got for me after I gave you mine last week.
well, deservedly so. Well, to begin, Hayden, I'd really just like for you to kind of share your background story, how you got to this point, in your academic and professional journey, and what specific actions you're taking right now as you pursue a future in marketing communications.
So as you said, I started in exercise science. I was pretty committed to strength and conditioning coaching, and I was studying amongst students who were on very distinguished tracks, whereas most people in my major and my classes and my classmates were studying for pre-physical therapy, pre-athletic training, and I found myself more so just focused on the major as a whole and hoping to be a coach one day. And that led me to an internship with the University of Georgia football team sports science department, where I was an intern data analyst managing data like that. And being immersed in that environment taught me about what the world of coaching was really like. And I can be honestly say that I was very grateful for that opportunity because I learned so much from an analytical standpoint that I bring into my schooling today. But on top of that, I realized that the world of coaching wasn't for me. I didn't have the athletic background nor the coaching background to really support what you needed as far as a skill set and network in that area. But on the bright side, I was also in the middle of my minor of sport management, and I was really enjoying it. And one of my most influential professors was a sport marketing professor. And one day, when I realized how much I was enjoying his class, I admired the happiness, the enthusiasm he came into every class with. I asked him, I said, I'm really considering pursuing sport management instead. I would be competing against people in sport management, and I didn't major in it. What should I do? And he recommended grad school. So I looked into programs, and when I saw the program at the University of South Carolina, I saw the MBA, dual MBA. So I'm also, I'm an MBA candidate at the moment, and I have also the Master of Sport and Entertainment Management degree dualed with that. And I figured, great opportunity to cast a wide net, develop my business acumen, and then also end up in sport management. And as you know, and as I've expressed to you in the past, we start with the MBA. The majority of my classes are the MBA, and that's where I just kind of fell in love with marketing. All the strategic communication behind it, the emotional messaging and stuff all around marketing has been something that I genuinely enjoy. And so I've been focusing my career path on that route. And when it comes to things I'm doing now, definitely implementing the skills as far as networking goes that you learn. Those are the practical things like getting yourself out there. One of the best pieces of advice I've gotten thus far is, everyone always says it's not what you know, it's who you know. But the reality of it is, when it comes to especially the job market, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. So
Mhm.
I've been doing my best to get my name out there in any way I can. Just, like I said, networking and everything like that. And as far as my skills in marketing, right now I have focused a lot on my sport marketing class because I have been lucky enough to learn from a sport marketing professor that teaches out of Kellogg on marketing, and he teaches us regular marketing. That's the North, for those that may not know, that's the Northwestern's textbook on marketing as a whole, not just sport marketing. So really putting a lot of energy into that and taking that seriously has given me really great skills to be a strategic marketer and really contribute to one day be someone responsible for generating campaigns that should one day get real results for an enterprise.
Awesome. Awesome. Now you mentioned, you're transitioning into marketing communications from your analytics and sports science background. And so many times, especially someone where you are in your stage, to have that awareness of what you don't want to do based on what you've learned, is a sign of maturity. But how do you see those experiences giving you a unique advantage as you enter into a marketing communications field?
Yeah, so 100, my answer to that is always the analytical mindset that I gained from that experience. Specifically starting with a STEM background. The everyone probably is familiar with the phrase, for a good example I like to bring up is correlation doesn't equal causation, but not everyone understands why,
Mhm.
and I do, from the statistics classes I had to take to the robust understanding of the scientific method that I had to develop. I approach things with an analytical mindset that not everyone in marketing would have if they were me. And to pair that with the need to take performance data and drive results in the football facility, I have experience in that regard too, because what I really appreciated about that job was I had to take massive conglomerates of data, kind of organize them, and give them to strength and conditioning coaches. And for those who may not be aware, strength and conditioning coaches don't like to look at numbers and graphs for the most part. They don't want to sit down and look at a huge data table. You got to give them something that shows them essentially what they want to see, but it's more so what they need to see disguised as what they want to see. So
Right.
I had to show them trends that could advise their decisions in the weight room to drive results in their athletes. And now the way I see it, I can take that same approach and to get actual results and take the data to get real results in marketing campaigns and everything like that as well.
Right. So turning data into action, so to speak.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
And just a little more background for our listeners today. Hayden and I, we've been working together for the last 6 weeks through the mentorship program during this fall 2025 semester. And today is our final episode. Last week, the roles were reversed. Hayden was the host of our mentoring episode, and he was able to ask me questions that I didn't have in advance either. And so it's just, I thought, a very good way to give Hayden some practical experience from a marketing communication standpoint, but also to give him some digital assets that he could use going forward. So a lot of the things we've talked about is in preparation of your next step on your journey, so to speak. Yeah, and we've talked about how hiring managers and executive leaders often look for repeatable patterns of success in the people that they're considering hiring. That which is an indicator that someone can learn quickly and performs consistently. So, what would you say is the pattern of success or patterns of success in your background that show that you can adapt and deliver?
I would say that for everywhere I've been, I feel anytime I've stepped into somewhere new, I've driven unexpected results. I think about the internship that I keep alluding to with the University of Georgia football team. That was not something I had done prior. And you are essentially fighting an uphill battle when you try and get strength and conditioning coaches who want to scream and yell in the weight room to look at graphs. So being able to create actionable insights in that setting, even though it's something I had not done before, is definitely driving results in my from where I stood. And then I look at my entrance into my MBA program. I came in as an exercise science major, and I'm around all these finance, marketing, and accounting background individuals who have experience in their college of businesses from undergrad. But I think to the experience of week one of orientation, where we had this case competition, um, and we were tasked with pitching a sustainability campaign for Coca-Cola Consolidated. And in that campaign, I was able to help my group formulate an idea that helped us pitch an idea to increase collection of bottles because they had already met their quota for the sustainability of their sources. So we realized that the problems with the collection. So we were effective in doing that. And out of 14 teams in my MBA program, we came in second, which of course we would have liked to have won. But that being said, coming in as someone with no business experience, I very much I took pride in that. Being able to really streamline it and play a pivotal role in such an effective presentation amongst a very heated competition was something I very much took pride in. And as I've gone forward, I'm in marketing now. And like I said, I take these cases that we do in my sport marketing class very seriously. And although this wasn't as much of a ranking order as it was during the case competition in the orientation week, that I have gotten great results and excellent feedback from my professor in that regard as well. I feel every single time I've been able to streamline the presentation my group presents, we've gotten great results and great feedback from my professor, which is something I very much take pride in because I very much respect his background and his knowledge of marketing. So when I'm able to get results in that classroom and in that setting, I feel that I'm consistently able to adapt and use my analytical mindset to get results on whatever I'm pursuing in that moment.
That's great. And certainly delivering unexpected, results from a positive perspective is always welcome, by managers and leadership. So I want to dive a little deeper into that aspect and that concept. Can you share a specific time or multiple times when your analysis led directly to a clear recommendation or improved outcome? Maybe an example of one of these unexpected results and outcomes.
Yeah, so I would love to tell the story of one of my more recent cases that I handled in my sport marketing class, where I love this one because it definitely mimics exactly what I look to achieve and work towards in the career field. And that was a case I did that was generating engagement and activity for the 2028 Solheim Cup. And if you don't know what that is just basically the women's golf version of the Ryder Cup, where it's the teams of Europe, of the countries of Europe versus the team USA head to head. And it's the biggest event in women's sports, as the case stated. I take pride in this one because organically I was able to consider all the stakeholders and really trace the issue down to its source and find a very practical way of increasing viewership for that event. And to be specific, my idea was to take the months and weeks leading right up to the event of the summer in 2028. What will that be? Sports fans are watching the Olympics. It was simple as that. So it was a paired partnership with the NBC Peacock rights holders who were rights holders of the Olympics as well as the Solheim Cup. Very convenient, excellent strategic maneuver that we could use. And just a paired campaign in order to increase viewership going from these same athletes in the Olympics to their rematch in the Solheim Cup. So my team and I took this approach that I formulated in order to come up with a great strategy to increase awareness and engagement for the Solheim Cup. And I was very proud to hear that my professor, who had been tasked with this campaign in his own experiences, he came up with the same idea. So
Hmm.
that told me directly that I was onto something, and I felt adept in that moment, in that field, which like I said, I took a lot of pride in because that is exactly what I'm going to pursue as a career going forward.
Awesome, awesome. And you mentioned, worked across, diverse teams or stakeholders to help achieve, alignment towards a specific goal. Can you elaborate a little bit further about what you learned about working on these teams, whether it's this scenario or different scenarios where, you've worked across different teams. You and I have talked a lot about different group dynamics and interpersonal differences and stuff. So dive a little deeper into that and just share some of your personal experiences of working across a diverse team like that.
When it comes to working in groups like that with diversity in views, approaches, mindsets, I've discovered a deep necessity, and it is a necessity to understand. And I say that because I think back to the case I alluded to in my MBA orientation, where we had to have this sustainability campaign and pitch it to Coca-Cola Consolidated executives that were actually going to use our ideas. With that being said, in the case itself, I noticed that it said that, and to be very specific, Coca-Cola Consolidated had met their sustainability quota for where they source their plastic materials. And so we were given multiple different approaches, one of which was to have up-chain relation management for the source of the plastic. And another approach was to increase initiatives to collect our the plastic products. It said that we were short on the collection and we were good on the sourcing, so that naturally told me that it was the right move to go with the collection. Thinking back to my actual experiences, someone in our group, a very smart individual who I learned a lot from in the process, was pretty adamant about doing the approach that managed the up the chain supplier relations. And at first, I was confused and I thought it would be a no-brainer to tell this person, no, it says this. This means that we shouldn't focus on that. We should focus on this instead. But they presented great ideas and they had a point that I thought was completely refuted by the contents of the case. So that really required listening to that person, seeing where they came from, understanding why they thought they what they did, because at the end of the day, it was a highly capable individual. They have this idea for a reason. And so I heard them out, and by presenting where my idea came from and where my reaction to their idea also came from, we were able to talk it out. And as a group, we realized that the approach really was to improve the collection. And another thing I take pride in is that our idea that we pitched, the second place winning idea, although it didn't win, was used in stadiums. We pitched a idea to have a barcode on recyclable collection areas to be able to you can scan and have yourself displayed as you throw out your bottle into the recycling bin, and that's been used at stadiums too. So we
Oh,
were very proud to see that our ideas were all actually implemented in practice by these companies. But more importantly, that learning experience told me that when it comes to working with the group with diversity in ideas and approaches and backgrounds, you need to understand, because things that you might think are no-brainers can be completely interpreted differently by someone for very perfectly good reasons.
right, right. What a creative way to accomplish that. Now,
Yeah.
let's just say, someone has just joined us to Progress. We're talking with Hayden Henry today. My name is Tom Winterstein, and we're working through a mentorship program. And Hayden, let's presume that someone that just joined us in Progress, they haven't heard anything that you said. And we know that they'll go back and they'll catch up and they'll listen. Okay, but let's just say, how would you see your analytical skills strengthening your ability to contribute inside of a marketing communications team? And again, keep in mind you're speaking to the people that just joined us.
Right. Right. Well, like I was saying earlier, it all comes down to driving, taking data and driving results. The analytical mindset where I'm able to understand and take data and truly apply a strategy to drive results. And like I mentioned earlier, it I'm equipped with this robust understanding of, the example I use is something as simple as correlation doesn't lead to causation. I understand that in a deeper way. So I'm able to take an analytical mindset that really taught me how to get results using the scientific method and to drive those same results implementing strategies in marketing. I know where to focus, I know where it begins, and I know how to take data and to create actionable insights by taking relevant details in identifying the proper KPIs and how we can take that data to really drive results with our strategy. I feel that it has strongly enabled me to have a robust understanding of these things and think strategically in ways that someone who may not have a background in STEM and wasn't working on analyzing trends in data and understanding statistics like I have to really get the same results in marketing.
Oh, that's great. And you certainly have had, a lot of success in your young past already. Um, Things that we like to consider repeatable patterns of success. But talk about perhaps a project or initiative that maybe didn't go as planned. or maybe something that you wouldn't have considered as a success at first. What did you do and how did you learn from it?
So when I think on something like that, it's still in the sales and marketing realm. I had a brief internship experience with a company called Campus Multimedia, and the interns on that team. I was a sales intern, and there were two interns I was working with, and we were tasked with finding potential partners for this company. The company specialized in facilitating partnerships between companies and their local brands so that they could their companies and their local school systems so they can have brand activations, increased awareness, and all things that go with school campaigns. And my fellow interns and I were tasked with scouting and researching these potential prospects. What really was our downfall to start was a lack of communication between ourselves because we were working on a compiled list of these prospects and we weren't streamlining how we were including data and what we each considered relevant. So after hours of working, I looked to our shared list and I saw that I listed company A because it presented this, that, and the other, whereas my colleague presented company B because of completely different reasons. And when I looked at it, I thought about our CEO looking at this hodgepodge of companies, realizing there's no consistency and that he can't understand why each company is relevant because they're relevant for completely different reasons. So in that moment, I learned the need to really start from the source and really communicate from the get-go and really understand the initiative in front before you go. Because I feel if we all had worked together a little bit better and understood what we were set out to do, which was compile a list for the CEO to really pick out good prospects, we'd have known, we need a little more consistency. We need a little more clear-cut reasons as to why these are good prospects because we don't want our CEO to look at them, have to wonder why they're good, and then figure it out on their own. We could definitely have made a better point A to point B approach had we communicated from the start.
Right, right. Now, transitioning gears just a little bit, you and I have talked about the evolution of technology, things that really you kind of grew up with that were invented during my professional career, such as, mobile devices and or the internet and things like that, that when I was your age didn't exist. Okay. And so to some degree, or you're going through something very similar right now, with the evolution of technology and the tools, including AI. So I'm curious to see, what have you used? How do you use them? How do you see them helping? How do you see technology helping you ramp quickly in a marketing role?
So I've used a pretty wide array of AI and technology. I focus mostly use ChatGPT, of course, for generative AI. That's helped me as a study tool and to really improve my analytical thinking and implement strategies. I've also used something like Gamma. Gamma has helped my classmates and I put together presentations in a way that really shapes our and adheres to our visions. So doing stuff like this and having I very much enjoy it. And I felt very lucky to be in a program where, and I believe I've quoted this professor to you before, but we have been begged to use AI. My career advisor says, I am imploring you to use AI, which I find funny because I would imagine if I was in high school when this all came about, it would be a much different story. But
Right.
we don't want kids using AI to do all of their homework. And I understand why I will be honest, it's very easy to do that. But that being said, I'm in a position where I'm getting ready for the workforce. And if you're someone like me who is strategic and analytical and can use these as tools rather than substitutes, it really just makes the productive super productive. So I've been able to create visions and execute initiatives that I wouldn't have been able to before without AI. And to give you a good example, when I came up with the idea of my cross promotional initiative between the Olympics and the Solheim Cup. I it's supposed to be word vomit to start into ChatGPT. This is my task. I have this idea. Can you help me glean the necessary information and the details that would maybe make this possible or maybe make it impossible? So by starting with my idea, I was able to realize this is very much possible. The NBC and Peacock are a dual rights holder. I can use that to my advantage. Help me find the data on this aspect of the women's golf demographic that overlaps with the Solheim Cup and the Olympics, or I should say women's golf and the Olympics. And so being able to execute these ideas using AI has really enabled me to generate much better results than I would without AI, because I have good ideas and I have excellent strategies, and by using AI, I'm able to actually bring them into life and really see the actual impact that I can have.
Right. No, and you and I, we're a lot alike when it comes to that. Although I have gray hair and you don't. We both have embraced technology during our journeys, and AI being the latest one that I have personally and professionally embraced. And I use it every day. And it's a matter of using it as a leverage to accomplish, your goals and to have bigger goals.
Yeah.
You know having owning all or parts of three different businesses, I'll often joke with my wife. I said, "Yeah, I work for a very tough boss, and my boss is very demanding." And she goes, "Well, you are the boss." I'm like, "Exactly." So she knows what
Exactly.
I mean.
Right.
But
Right.
but I find I can leverage technology to help offload some of the demands that I set for myself and my teams.
Absolutely.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think to echo what you've said, that's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what have your assistantship or internships taught you about navigating structured processes, approvals, or multi-step environments where each step of the way may not be something that you've defined? You may be part of someone or something else's process, not anything that you've created. So what has that taught you, the experiences that you have had, what has that taught you about navigating through those?
Something it's taught me is something that I'm still learning, and that is to kind of trust myself. And I think back to the mishap I had with the lack of communication between myself and fellow interns. I really liked my approach to, and this is a specific example, but I really liked my approach to prospecting these companies. And I thought I was presenting these companies to the CEO for good reasons. And in my head, I was thinking to myself, my fellow interns probably think the same thing, you know? So I kind of let them do their own thing, and not that I was to tell them otherwise, but I chose not to communicate what I was doing. And we came to find out that the details I was including were the details the CEO wanted to see. And I only say that because if I had spoken up and communicated and had trusted my approach, I would have been able to nip a lot of the errors in communication in the bud and been able to establish a much more streamlined approach. So from stuff like that and these projects where our output has genuine impacts and actual results, I've learned to trust and communicate my ideas, because there's a very good chance that those ideas are good and I should go that way. And if they're not, by communicating to them, I can end up on the same page with my coworkers. I can get guidance from my superiors. So to really be able to have confidence in the ideas I come up with and my approach to driving results, if I can just trust it enough to communicate it, I can definitely be a lot more effective, I think. So
Right.
that's what I would say I would learn the most. I have learned the most.
Right. And so that sounds like it was almost an internal decision for you to communicate or not to communicate.
Yeah.
But if you have an experience where you could share a moment when you adjusted your communication style based on the audience you were speaking to. So not whether I will or I won't, to say, oh, I need to make an adjustment here. Have you encountered anything like that along your journey so far?
Yeah, so far I love to continue to allude to the case competition from my MBA, because we these are people I know very well now, because we have gone months in this MBA program, but this was week one of orientation. So we got assigned to this group. I believe there was 6 or 7 of us, and brand new individuals I had never met. And I had to communicate. We delegated because we were on the clock. We had just a certain amount of time to analyze this case and come up with a strategic plan to present to executives. It was one of the more higher pressure situations I had been in up until that point. So with that in mind, I had to make sure if I had an idea and input to someone else's initiative that they had been working on for the past 2 hours, I needed to make sure I delivered it the right way. And a good example of that was there was an individual who wanted to incorporate involving local churches in our efforts. And we thought it was an excellent idea because that was consistent with the Coca-Cola Consolidated's brand messaging at that point. But as we were going through our campaign, we struggled to see how that actually practically worked in. And this was something someone we lauded over this idea to start. She had been working very hard on it. And in that moment, I had to bring up the idea that we have this step-by-step plan. Which step does this represent? So in that moment, I had to really ask her questions and ask her where she thought she was going with it before giving my input. Because if I had just given my input and almost suggested that we didn't need the idea as much as we thought we did, that would have been disrespectful to all the work they had been doing the entire time.
Mm,
So I've learned that even under high pressure, you need to understand it. It all goes back to that theme of understanding when you're in a setting like that. And I think in my experiences, when I've been able to understand a bit better, I'm able to communicate in the right way.
mm. That's awesome. Now, people that know you well would know this is that you are proficient in Spanish. Now, how, if at all, has that helped shape the way you communicate or connect with others that may not be proficient in Spanish?
That's an interesting question because I would be lying if I thought about the everyday communication being affected by it. What I will say though is it's something I take pride in. And another thing too is, I guess, to kind of go back on what I just said just a tad, it definitely increases my ability to understand. And I say that because I feel when people hear others speaking in different languages and they literally cannot understand them, there's a disconnect there that goes beyond a language barrier. They interpret the individual differently. They will make assumptions about the individual because they can't understand what they're saying. Now, my ability to speak Spanish is better than my ability to understand. That being said, I can definitely understand it better than the average person. And so when I can giggle at witty commercials that sometimes, speaking of which, sometimes when I'm watching TV and I think it's like Peacock, I'll just end up with Spanish commercials. And I had like a Verizon commercial that on in Spanish on my TV. And again, I've been out of the Spanish game for a while. I majored in it, or I minored in it in college, and I finished my minor years ago now. And I try and stay up to date, but you don't use it, you lose it. But I was able to catch a lot of it, and there were jokes being made where I was able to giggle. And I realized, being able to have an understanding and seeing the humor in what other people are saying, while a lot of people like me who grew up speaking English wouldn't even be able to understand and appreciate, is definitely something I take pride in. So just being able to understand people in more ways than others may be able to is definitely something I'm grateful for.
Hmm. Well, that is a skill and a talent that I do not have. I am not proficient in
Yeah.
Spanish, although I did take many years of French, including high school and in college. So I'm going to put you on the spot here for any of our Spanish proficient listeners. Anything you'd like to just share? Short, simple, involved, anything you'd like to just share in Spanish?
Spanish. Ahora estoy buscando recursos para usar mi español porque cuando no lo uso, lo perdió. I believe I just said I'm looking for resources to use my Spanish more often because if I don't use it, I lose it. So
Excellent.
anyone listening in Spanish can understand Spanish, let me know how I could have done better.
Excellent.
Hope I didn't say anything that was too incorrect to be offensive. I do not remember if I was correct right there.
I wouldn't know, but you're a good sport for playing along. I appreciate that and me putting you on the spot. So I'm going to shift gears again a little bit. Your volunteer work is impressive and it spans organizations like the Food Bank of Northeast Georgia and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm curious what motivated you to get involved and how has service influenced how you show up as a communicator?
Yeah. So starting with the Food Bank of Northeast Georgia, in complete transparency, that began as getting credit for a class. I had to volunteer for a class and I went and going, and I'm glad you touched upon the communication because what really I enjoyed about that experience and made me want to do it more and continue to be a contributor was the people I met there. I was presented with people who were also like me, going to get credit for a service learning class, but also had been there frequently. And I was able to learn from their experiences. They tell me how rewarding it is. And I realized I surprised myself and almost disappointed in myself to think, why am I not doing this kind of stuff more often? Like people don't do this just to check off a box in their class. People do this because it's the right thing to do. So that's another thing I've been striving to, and I strive to make more time to do it now, but I feel in the future I'm going to measure my success by how much I can do for others. So the more time and more, I should say resources I get for myself to help others will be a massive metric I use in my own measure of my own success. And as far as the communication
Yeah.
in the Bank of Northeast Georgia, I met so many different people from so many different backgrounds. I'm not a very religious person. Became and connected very deeply with someone who was there and who was very religious. And he was actually one of the people who was there to get credit for a class as well, but he was able to connect the experience to his religion. And I was able to learn a lot from that experience. I was there for credit for a class, and I was also happy to get personal growth in that moment as well. But he was there for a class and he felt he was serving his religion very well. And so being able to just kind of connect with someone like that was excellent. And then moving on to my experience with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, that was a fraternity initiative for my fraternity at the University of Georgia. I was in the Epsilon chapter of the Beta Theta Pi fraternity there. I served as the vice president of programming there for a while. So this cause is pretty near and dear to my heart. And very much appreciate that being brought up because it incorporated a sensitive topic, particularly for young men, specifically of mental health, and in a fraternity setting where I wouldn't imagine most people would pair the idea of vulnerability and a Greek life fraternity very much. And so I took pride in the fact that my fraternity represented and contributed to that campaign and that foundation with our philanthropic efforts. So that setting and that effort, being able to maybe not, I wouldn't call it oxymoronic, but contradictory nature of encouraging vulnerability and emphasizing the importance of mental health in a setting and in a group of people you wouldn't expect that from was definitely something I took pride in. And I really, really enjoyed being able to contribute to a really, really enjoyable effort at the ASFP.
Great. Well, there's no question in my mind that the experience that you've gained by service to others will carry you long and far. Because if you think about inside the business world or any organization, it is about service to others, whether that service is to a client, services to our peers, our coworkers, our supervisors. It's all about service to others. So I commend you for that, and I think that service will carry you further than you may realize today. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Keep that
Yes.
up.
Thank
Keep
you.
that up. So let's fast forward just a little bit. And I've got just a couple of more questions for you, just so you kind of know where we're at. Let's fast forward. Let's say you're stepping into a marketing communications role tomorrow. What do you think your first 100 days looks like?
I think the answer is simple for me, and that's connecting with the people around me as the best I can. I think about when I first started the MBA, they talked about networking, a term that was so foreign to me as an exercise science student. And once I step into that role, it's not just networking, it's building a foundation. It's building a foundation of support around myself, support for the people around me. I'm joining a team at that point. So I see those first 100 days as a need to learn as much as I can about the people around me, what works for them, what doesn't, what communication style is most effective for them, what communication style isn't. How am I going to be able to understand these people and work with them in a way that one supports them in a way that needs to support them, and two, gets results for the job I'm setting out to do. So as being able to learn and connect with the people around me is always going to be the first priority I have when I step into a role.
Good, good, excellent. I like your approach on that. Now that brings me to my final question. That doesn't mean you have to stop talking, because if there's anything that wasn't covered that you wanted to get out and say, this will be your kind of last chance to do it. But I'm going to ask you this final question, and you can go for as long as you'd like, though. But what's the one thing that you'd like listeners to take away about you, as you step into the next chapter of your professional journey? What's that one takeaway that you want someone to remember you by?
If I had to choose one thing, and luckily I can talk for as long as I want, so that one thing can be, I have no word limit on my one thing, is that I have a genuine passion for lifting up the people around me. And I work towards that goal in any way that I can. And I try and do that in everything that I do. And it can be as small as when I'm speaking to someone in class, making sure to smile and make eye contact when they're speaking to me, making sure that even in the tiniest of exchanges, they feel heard. And if I'm in the work setting, telling someone they did a good job and appreciating efforts they may go through to make my life easy and to just, I like to give people pats on the back. I know a lot of times it's seen as, I'm not a participation medal guy by any sense of the word, but I do feel like the greatest measure of a person is how they treat other people. And I know that's a broad thing to say, but I want to be known for the way I make other people feel. And that is something that when it comes to my professional development, which I'm so involved in these days, I want to be in a position where that kind of thing is appreciated. So it's just so important to me that anytime I walk away from a conversation, anytime I get done with an introduction with someone I meet for the first time. I want people to walk away, feel I want to feel good and I want them to feel good and glad they met me, glad they spoke to me. And, not for any selfish reason where I'm like, I hope they want to speak to me again, or I hope I look cool. But, I just feel that everyone deserves to be lifted up and everyone deserves to feel good and be reminded that there are people out there that, want positivity for them. And so that's something I strive for. It's a priority of mine for who I am as a person. And if I could have nothing else, I would just be, if I could be nothing else, I should say, I would want to be someone that lifts other people up.
That's awesome, and just an amazing approach for someone at your age and where you are on your journey. So, Hayden, this has been an excellent conversation, and what stands out to me and hopefully others is not only your clarity but your humility and your intentional approach to growth. And at such a young age, you've built a foundation rooted in analytics, discipline, and service. And you're translating that into communication skills that are thoughtful, deliberate, and increasingly strategic. And for everyone listening today, offered a great window into how emerging talent prepares, learns, and positions themselves to have an impact, on the future. And so you're certainly on track, to do that. Your mindset, your curiosity, and your willingness to evolve show the traits that tend to serve people well in large organizations and fast-moving industries alike. So, Hayden, thanks again so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. I really appreciated the opportunity to kind of reflect and communicate. So thank you very much for that. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was an honor and a pleasure. And so that brings us to the end of today's episode. And conversations like this remind me why mentorship matters. It gives rising professionals the space to articulate their growth, clarify their direction, and reflect on skills that truly set them up for success. And hopefully we've done that, for you during this process, Hayden. And you've demonstrated such a balance of analytical thinking, cultural awareness, service, and just genuine curiosity, all qualities that translate into being a great communicator. You're not there yet. We all, we all have more work to do, and that comes with time and experience. And that's
What I
kind
have
of
you for, I would say too.
what's that?
That's what I have you for at the end of the day too.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you'll have others,
Yeah.
so when it comes to, strategy and leadership, experience as a great teacher. But I'm confident that your path forward will continue to build on the foundation that you've already laid. So thank you all for listening to this episode of the University of South Carolina Darla Moore School of Business Mentorship Program. I'm your host, Tom Winterstein. Thank you and goodbye.